වීඩියෝ ඇමතුම්ද සමග මැසෙන්ජර් සේවාවන් රැසකට සහ POTV Go සඳහා නොමිලේ ඩේටා ශ්‍රී ලංකා ටෙලිකොම්.
ලෙන්ගතුකම වැඩි කරගන්න ලව්ජි රුපියල් 50ට අඩු කළා.
මාමේ එන්න අපිට එකක් බොමු.
Tonight, doing the right thing. Chinese Foreign Minister calls US WHO funding cut an inhumane act in a call with his Sri Lankan counterpart and reiterates continued support for the key UN organisation. Cancelled. Lifting the curfew halted to bring back security forces personnel on leave. The cost of public security. 95 naval personnel test positive for COVID-19 virus as Sri Lanka's total shoots up close to the 500 mark. Planning for the future. Sri Lankan agri-innovators taking strides towards food security in the face of climate threats. All this and much more coming up on this Sunday, the 26th of April 2020.
SMS කර රුපියල් මිලියන 3ක මුල්තැන්ගේ උපකරණ දිනාගෙන අවුරුද්දෙම කුස්සිය ටයිම් සේව් කරගන්න.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I'm Shanella Fernando in your top stories tonight. With the detection of 25 fresh cases today, the total number of COVID-19 infections in the country increased up to 485. Only 358 among them, however, are active cases. So far, 95 Navy personnel have tested positive for the virus, and authorities have taken measures to quarantine family members and associates of those infected while disinfecting the areas they frequented.
Sri Lanka reported COVID-19 patients in the excess of 20 for the past 2 days, which has resulted in cases surging past the 400 mark. With the detection of 25 fresh cases, the total number of infections reported in the country currently stands at 485. Among the total number of COVID-19 patients in the country, 358 are currently active cases. Meanwhile, 120 people have been discharged after complete recovery, while 7 others have succumbed to the virus so far. 273 patients are currently under medical observation on suspicion of contracting the virus. Among the 40 patients detected yesterday were 20 Navy personnel. Out of the 20 members are 10 personnel from the AdaDerana Navy camp and 10 other personnel who are on leave. Meanwhile, 4 civilians found in the environs of the AdaDerana Navy camp were placed in self-quarantine. They are residents of Batagama and Kandana. Meanwhile, 6 patients detected at the Kurunegala Teaching Hospital were transferred to the infectious disease hospital last night. The 6 patients include the wife and the 6-month-old infant of a COVID-19 infected Navy sailor residing in the Bandara Koswatha area in Panduvasnuwara. Another Navy sailor who travelled with the Bandara Koswatha patient on a motorcycle had also been confirmed to have contracted the virus. He had tested positive after being admitted to the Kurunegala Teaching Hospital on Friday. Also among the 6 patients identified at the Kurunegala Teaching Hospital are 2 soldiers who served at the Panaguda Army camp. One of them is a resident of Mayaya in Malsiripura and the other is a resident of Alawa. Police meanwhile took measures today to temporarily close down 3 roads leading to the Mahayaya area. Meanwhile, locations that the Alawa patient had been found to have frequented were disinfected today. Following a Navy sailor at the AdaDerana camp residing in Kudagama having contracted the virus, 30 people from 8 houses who came into contact with him were made to self-quarantine. Meanwhile, a lorry driver who provided transport to 2 naval personnel from the AdaDerana Navy camp was instructed to self-isolate after 1 sailor tested positive for COVID-19. In the meantime, the family members of the COVID-19 infected sailor residing in the Dahamipura area in Baragamahambantota were instructed to self-quarantine. Residents exposed to the family members were also requested to adhere to mandatory self-isolation. Meanwhile, the family members of the COVID-19 infected sailor from the Palanvatta area in Piliandala were directed to quarantine facilities by the Navy. The locations frequented by them were also subjected to disinfection. Meanwhile, a naval officer at the AdaDerana Navy camp passed away last night after being treated at the intensive care unit of the Sri Lanka Navy General Hospital. Releasing a statement, the Navy media spokesperson, Lieutenant Commander Isuru Suryabandara, confirmed the cause of death as leptospirosis, which is also known as rat fever. His remains, however, were cremated in accordance with international quarantine regulations. Meanwhile, PCR tests were conducted on another 160 residents of Bandaranaike Mawatha in Kesalwatha, Colombo. However, the results of the test revealed that none of the residents were infected with the virus.
කොරෝනා වෛරසය පැතිරීම වළක්වන්න සබන් යොදා දෑත් සෝදන්න.
Another group of 113 Sri Lankans stranded in India were brought back to the country today under the government's repatriation program. A crew of 7 took off to India today on a Sri Lankan Airlines charter flight and landed back in the country, following which the returnees were directed to mandatory quarantine process. The government launched a special program to repatriate Sri Lankan students stranded in foreign countries amid the COVID-19 global pandemic. Accordingly, they took measures to bring down batches of students from India, Pakistan and Nepal in the past few days. Under this program, a Sri Lankan Airlines charter flight took off to bring back Sri Lankans from India. Flight UL 1194 left to Coimbatore, India at 9:05 am this morning and returned with 113 students and Triforces personnel at 12:05 this afternoon. According to our airport correspondent, the charter flight was operated by a crew of 7. Upon landing, the returnees were directed to quarantine centres at Busa, Punani and Oyamadu.
ප්‍රථමයෙන් දැනට සූදානම් කළ තිබෙන මේ සාකලාපීය රටවලින් ඉස්සල්ලාම ශිෂ්‍ය ශිෂ්‍යයන් රැගෙන ඒමට ඊට පස්සේ එතනින් ඔබට ගිහිලා අනිකුත් රටවල් වලටත් දැනුම් දීලා තිබෙනවා. එතකොට මේ දැනුම් දීම කරලා තිබ්බට අපි ගේන්නේ යම්කිසි ප්‍රමාණයක් අපිට පාලනය කරගත හැකි පරිදි මේ රටේ තියෙන තත්ත්වයක් එක්ක. නමුත් සියලුම ශිෂ්‍යයන් රැගෙන ඒමට මේ වන විටත් සියලුම කටයුතු සම්පාදනය කළා තියෙන්නේ. නිරෝධායන මධ්‍යස්ථානයේ සකසලා තියෙන්නේ. ගුවන් තොටුපළේ සම්බන්ධයෙන් කටයුතු කළා තියෙනවා. ගුවන් යානාවලටත් දැනුම් දීලා තිබෙනවා. ඉදිරි සතිය ඇතුළත මේ ආකාරයෙන් විවිධ රටවල් වලින් ශිෂ්‍ය ශිෂ්‍යාවන් ප්‍රථමයෙන් ලංකාවට රැගෙන ඒමට කටයුතු කරයි කියලා බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන්න පුළුවන්.
Right now, the world faces not only a massive threat from the COVID-19 virus, but a growing challenge to the way we produce food. With restrictions placed on imports of non-essential food varieties, the dependence on produce grown locally becomes all the more important. However, can Sri Lanka's farmers continue to supply enough to fill the gap? With yields continuing to decrease due to climate change and with the long-term effects of the COVID-19 virus on the future of food production still a big question mark, the push for innovation has become the only way that countries can possibly rise up to the challenge.
With the government's campaign to promote home gardens across the country to improve food security in the face of restrictions placed on manufacturing and imports by the COVID-19 crisis, new technology needs to be focused on in order to cater to increased demand. In addition, with climate change playing havoc on weather patterns, making predicting weather all the more difficult, right now the need to embrace innovations has never been more urgent. One of the biggest threats to food security remains a marked decrease in the nutritional values of crop yields as global temperatures rise. This is highlighted even more by reports that by the year 2050, 5% of dietary protein from the staple crops of over a dozen countries may be lost. In Sri Lanka, however, there are signs that the warnings have been heeded, as educated, highly skilled young entrepreneurs are taking up the mantle of agri-innovators armed with the know-how to do more with less. This means less space, less water, and almost negative dependence on the fickleness of the weather for increased yields and increased profitability.
Sri Lanka, being a country on the equatorial region, faces a number of challenges with regards to food security. Our temperatures are at some points extreme heat. and crops find it really difficult to grow. The more time goes by and the effects of global warming become more apparent, as we've seen in the past year, the number of acres of land required to produce the same output of crop also increases. So at a certain point, we'll reach a point of no return where there's no space for more agricultural lands. And this is where systems like vertical farming make it a lot better. We're more space efficient. We can grow more crops per square foot or per an acre, whichever way you like to see it. With floods and droughts also becoming more and more powerful as the years go by, we need more climate resilient systems in order to help mitigate the effects of global warming as a nation.
With the company using vertical farming techniques to optimize space within a completely climate-controlled environment, the question remains, how can Sri Lanka's farmers gain the benefit of such new developments?
The techniques used behind vertical farming have been around for a while. Japan started using the technology about 30 years ago. It was very expensive at the time, it still kind of is, but back then it was not feasible because LED technology is not where it's at today. There are a number of challenges in taking this technology to Sri Lankan farmers at this moment of time. Naturally, the cost is extremely high at the moment, but as more farms pop up around the world, the costs are driven down extremely fast. So perhaps within 10 years or so, this would be feasible to do on a smaller rural scale, but at the time, probably not. There are a number of different technologies that rural farmers can adapt from our system. For example, automated nutrients that could be passed along through different farmers, but the majority of the system still is very difficult to replicate on a smaller scale.
The Attorney General's department was given the green light to resume work tomorrow after it was shut down following a staff member possibly coming into contact with a COVID-19 carrier. Meanwhile, a discussion on the reopening of post offices in curfew-imposed districts is set to be held tomorrow. A discussion is set to be held tomorrow regarding the reopening of post offices in the districts where the curfew continues to be in effect. The Postmaster General stated that the Task Force on Essential Goods and Services has also been informed of the possible reopening of post offices. Meanwhile, Director General of Health Services Dr. Anil Jasinghe has given the go-ahead for the resumption of work at the Attorney General's department, which was temporarily shut down after a security officer working at the department came into contact with a COVID-19 carrier. Accordingly, the Attorney General's department is due to resume work from tomorrow. In view of the prevailing situation, the Economic Centre in Narahempita was disinfected today by the Fire Department of the Colombo Municipal Council and the public health officials. The Economic Centre, which was shut down for disinfection today, is scheduled to reopen tomorrow at 6 a.m. In the meantime, several roadblocks in Colombo area were also seen being disinfected today. According to the latest statement issued by the President's Media Division this evening, the curfew for the 21 districts, which was supposed to be lifted at 5 a.m. tomorrow, has been cancelled in order to facilitate the return to camps of Triforce personnel on leave. Therefore, the curfew for the districts including Colombo, Gampaha, Kalutara and Putlam will be lifted at 5 a.m. on the 28th. Furthermore, Army Commander Lieutenant General Shavindra Silva stated that Triforces personnel on leave who are unable to find transport have been requested to report to the nearest camp. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa visited the Kataragama area today, where he met with members of the clergy and engaged in religious observances. During his visit, Chief Incumbent of the Kirivehera Rajamahaviharaya, Venerable Kobavaka Dambinda Thera, expressed satisfaction in the government's undertakings in battling the COVID-19 outbreak and handed over a donation of 1 million rupees to the COVID-19 Health and Social Welfare Fund.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who arrived at the historic Kataragama sacred site yesterday, visited the Kirivehera Rajamahaviharaya and received blessings of the chief incumbent Venerable Kobavaka Dambinda Thera. The prelate expressed his satisfaction in the conduct of the president and the government in facing the COVID-19 virus and presented a donation of Rs 1 million to the president towards the COVID-19 Health and Social Services Fund. Afterwards, the president engaged in religious observances at the site. Following this visit, the president then arrived at the Sri Abhinavarame Viharya, where he paid his respects to the chief incumbent, Venerable Kapugama Sarana Tissatera, and received blessings. The president then engaged in a special ceremony at the historic Ruhunuma Kataragama Devalaya, organized to invoke blessings on the country and the people.
The foreign ministers of China and Sri Lanka reiterated the two countries' continued support for the World Health Organization's efforts to coordinate a global response to the COVID-19 pandemic, following the cutting back of funding by US President Donald Trump earlier this month. During a phone call between the two countries' top diplomats, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi called the US move, quote, an inhumane act which puts them on the side of the virus and makes them enemies of human beings, unquote.
During a telephone conversation held between Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and Minister of Foreign Relations Dinesh Gunawardene on Friday, the Chinese government expressed its continued support for the World Health Organization amidst the pulling back of funding from the United States. Foreign Minister Wang highlighted how essential the global role of the World Health Organization is in the fight against the novel coronavirus pandemic. He highlighted that certain countries are taking advantage of the pandemic for their own political purposes and attempting to shift the blame to the WHO for their slow response to the outbreak. Foreign Minister Wang said, quote, it's a very inhuman act which puts them on the side of the virus and makes them the enemies of human beings, unquote. Foreign Minister Gunawardene praised China's firm support to the WHO, saying China supports developing countries, including Sri Lanka, by supporting the UN body. Minister Gunawardene added that Sri Lanka will stand firmly with China in supporting the organization in playing a bigger role in the fight against the global pandemic. Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Wang also held a phone conversation on Friday with the Secretary General of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, Lim Jock Hoi, over cooperation on fighting against COVID-19. A special summit of ASEAN, China, Japan and the Republic of Korea, called ASEAN Plus 3 or APT on COVID-19, was held earlier this month via video conference. At the summit, China emphasized the awareness of a community with a shared future for mankind and announced the provision of another 100 million face masks and other urgently needed medical supplies to support ASEAN countries. China says it will continue to provide anti-epidemic supplies to ASEAN countries based on their needs and support ASEAN in setting up a COVID-19 response fund.
Former Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe has called for India to take a leadership role in the SAARC region's COVID-19 response, with a central authority figure coordinating efforts. These remarks were made in an interview with a regional media outlet yesterday.
Former Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe has called for a regional humanitarian response to the COVID-19 pandemic in the SAARC region due to a lack of global leadership. He made these remarks in an interview with The Hindu published yesterday. The ex-premier has suggested that India take the position of leadership in formulating a SAARC-led response. Wickremesinghe called for a proposal drafted by two countries which could be considered and amended based on the requirements of other SAARC members. He also suggested the need for a common centre with a single authority in charge of coordinating a humanitarian response with medical personnel who effectively understand the unique requirements of each member country. Wickremesinghe also called for contributions to be sourced from donors such as the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank and the Japanese government. The former premier added that the current situation provides countries with an opportunity to reformat the manufacturing and agricultural sectors as well as the supply chains, which could help in creating jobs. He added that although Sri Lanka's response to the outbreak has been complemented by a strong public health network, the country needs to increase testing, which he said would create more job opportunities and a chance to break into markets for medical equipment such as hand sanitizers.
Meanwhile, leave granted for Triforces personnel have been cancelled by the Ministry of Defence until further notice. According to the ministry, the decision affects all officers and other ranks of the Triforces with immediate effect. Accordingly, all Triforces personnel on leave are instructed to report to their respective camps immediately and are advised to contact respective officers in charge for more duty-related information. The Chinese embassy handed over a stock of protective equipment to the Sri Lanka Navy at a ceremony held at the naval headquarters on Friday. The donation was made to assist the Navy's efforts to contain the COVID-19 outbreak in the country. The safety overalls, face masks, gloves, safety glasses and thermometers donated will help provide additional protection for personnel following the detection of dozens of COVID-19 exposed sailors in the past few days following urban operations to track down infected disinfected patients. The donation was accepted by Commander of the Navy Vice Admiral P.L. De Silva from the Defence Attaché of the Embassy of People's Republic of China in Sri Lanka, Senior Colonel Wang Dong. The Navy commander expressed his gratitude to the People's Republic of China for the contribution on behalf of the Navy. More news on the other side of this break. Stay tuned.
නිෂ්පාදිත දිනය කවදත් අලුත් වටවල තේ අරගන්න.
වටවල තේ ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ තේ එක.
In your business news, gold has risen by 2.7% to its highest position since November last year, following a major bulge in asset purchases by central banks across the world that has seen balance sheets balloon and made investors flock towards gold as a safe haven.
The price of gold has climbed 2.7% in the past 5 sessions of trading and pushed the Philadelphia Gold and Silver Index to its strongest position since November last year. The rise in gold follows a major increase in asset purchases by central banks in the recent past that has ballooned their balance sheets as banks move to calm the turmoil in the markets in the face of massive COVID-19 economic backlashes. Gold prices have spiked by 15% since the Federal Reserve's March 23rd announcement of its intentions to buy more treasury and mortgage-backed securities. The securities purchases are being made in what the Fed has said will be, quote, in the amounts needed to support smooth market functioning, unquote. The balance sheet of the Federal Reserve has exploded past a staggering $6.5 trillion, an increase of 75% since August last year. This continued bulge in asset purchases is expected to further fuel the increase in gold prices. However, analysts expect some turbulence in the short term. However, the outcome of the monetary policy update from federal open market officials next Wednesday will weigh heavily on this.
At a time where the world is facing the brunt of coronavirus, certain countries have shown improved COVID-19 daily numbers. In some countries, restrictions have been lifted, such as in South Korea, where church services have recommenced, however, with social distancing maintained.
Following coronavirus infection fears and a lockdown in Pakistan, Pakistanis are ready to celebrate the month of Ramadan behind closed doors. Pakistan, which is a predominantly Muslim country, where more than 90% of its more than 200 million people practice Islam, most of them fast during the holy month. Meanwhile, South Korea's large churches reopened today, requiring worshippers to keep their distance and wear masks after the government relaxed restrictions on religious gatherings aimed at slowing the spread of the coronavirus. The Onuri Church, one of the biggest churches in Seoul, required members to sign up online ahead of the service and sit at designated seats to maintain distance. It has also limited attendance to 700 in a hall with a capacity of 3,000 people. Last Sunday, South Korea extended its social distancing policy until May 5th, but offered some relief for religious and sports facilities previously subjected to strict restrictions. South Korea managed to curb the first major outbreak outside China with massive testing and aggressive contact tracing, but there have been a series of small outbreaks involving churches and other clusters. Meanwhile, Mi Feng, a national spokesperson to Chinese Health Commission, stated that all COVID-19 patients in Wuhan have been discharged from hospitals as of today, with the joint efforts of medical staff from Wuhan and those who came from around the nation to support Wuhan. He also added that the Health Commission will continue with measures of preventing imported cases and domestic rebounds to restore medical order and see to the medical needs of the people as soon as possible. The World Health Organization yesterday said that there was currently no evidence that people who have recovered from COVID-19 and have antibodies are protected from a second coronavirus infection. In a scientific brief, the agency warned governments against issuing immunity passports or risk-free certificates to people who have been infected, as the immunity is not guaranteed. The WHO said it continued to review the evidence on antibody responses to COVID-19. In the meantime, the novel coronavirus has affected most countries across the globe, recording 203,922 fatalities. The total amount of global infections is now close to 3 million. However, 842,241 people were able to recover from the virus.
We'll return after this short commercial break. Don't go away. With that, we wrap up tonight's edition of First at 9. Thank you for joining. I'm Shanella Fernando. Good night.